The clock had just struck midnight when Jenny Parker's car rolled down the quiet streets of her hometown. The third-year law student's eyes were heavy after spending countless hours at the library preparing for her upcoming finals. The steady hum of her car's engine was the only sound breaking through the peaceful night air, that is, until the sudden flash of red and blue lights lit up her rearview mirror. Perfect timing, she muttered under her breath, carefully pulling over to the side of the road. She'd noticed her taillight was out earlier that week, but hadn't found time to get it fixed between her intense study sessions and intern work at the local FBI field office. Officer Kevin Reynolds approached her window with a flashlight beam that seemed unnecessarily bright for the situation. Jenny squinted against the glare, trying to maintain her composure despite her exhaustion. "License and registration," he demanded, skipping any form of greeting. His tone carried an edge that seemed out of place for a routine traffic stop. "Of course, officer," Jenny replied politely, reaching for her glove compartment. As she pulled out her registration, her FBI visitor's pass slipped out onto the passenger seat. The officer's demeanor shifted instantly when he spotted the pass. His shoulders tensed, and his grip on the flashlight tightened noticeably. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered, his voice now sharp with suspicion. "I'm sorry, is there a problem?" Jenny asked, confusion clear in her voice. "It's just a broken taillight, right?" "I said step out of the vehicle. Now." Officer Reynolds' hand moved to rest on his belt, a gesture that made Jenny's heart rate spike. She carefully opened her door, trying to keep her movements slow and deliberate. The night air was chilly against her skin as she stood up, her legs stiff from hours of sitting in the library. "That FBI pass, you trying to intimidate me with that?" Officer Reynolds questioned, his voice dripping with accusation. "You know, impersonating a federal officer is a serious offense." Jenny's eyes widened. "No, sir, you don't understand. I'm an intern at the field office. My father is." "Hands against the vehicle," he cut her off, reaching for his handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent." Jenny couldn't believe what was happening. Her mind raced as the cold metal of the handcuffs clicked around her wrists. This had to be some kind of bizarre nightmare brought on by too much studying. But the bite of the evening air and the rough texture of her car's surface under her palms told her this was all too real. "Officer, please, if you just let me explain," she tried again, her voice trembling slightly despite her best efforts to stay calm. "Save it for the station," he snapped, leading her toward his patrol car. "We'll see how real that FBI pass is once we run your credentials." As Jenny was placed in the back of the police cruiser, she caught a glimpse of her phone lighting up on her car's passenger seat. Her father's contact photo flashed on the screen. He always checked in when she studied late. Little did Officer Reynolds know, but his overzealous arrest was about to create a storm he never saw coming. The patrol car pulled away from the curb, leaving Jenny's car parked under a streetlight, its broken taillight a silent witness to the unfolding drama. She took deep breaths, reminding herself of everything she'd learned in law school about staying calm in crisis situations. One thing was certain. This night was about to become much longer than either Officer Reynolds or Jenny could have anticipated. The police station buzzed with late-night activity as the officer led his young arrestee through the front doors. Despite her situation, she walked with remarkable composure, her law school training evident in her calm demeanor. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the tired faces of desk officers and the occasional late-night visitor. "Look what we've got here," the officer announced to the booking sergeant, his voice carrying a hint of triumph. Someone trying to pass herself off as FBI personnel. He placed her visitor's pass on the desk with an air of someone presenting evidence of a major crime. The booking sergeant, a veteran officer with graying hair and kind eyes, looked up from his paperwork. His expression shifted from routine boredom to curiosity as he studied both the pass and the young woman standing before him. "Found her with this FBI pass during a routine traffic stop," the arresting officer continued, his chest puffed out slightly. "Pretty serious offense, impersonating federal personnel." The young woman spoke up, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "If you just let me explain." "You'll have plenty of time to explain," the officer cut her off, the same aggressive tone from the traffic stop still present in his voice. "Right after we process you and verify your identity." The booking sergeant's eyes narrowed slightly at his colleague's tone. He'd seen enough in his 20 years on the force to know when something didn't add up. The young woman's composed behavior didn't match the typical profile of someone trying to impersonate law enforcement. "Let's start with your name and contact information," the sergeant said, his tone professionally neutral as he began the booking process. Just then, the station's phone rang. The booking sergeant reached for it, but the night shift captain got there first, picking up the call at his desk. The captain's face, usually set in an expression of stoic professionalism, suddenly paled as he listened to the voice on the other end. "Yes, sir. I understand, sir. Right away, sir." The captain's voice carried an unusual note of tension as he hung up the phone. He walked over to the booking desk, his steps measured but urgent. "Officer," the captain addressed the arresting officer, "a word, please." His tone made it clear this wasn't a request. The officer's triumphant expression faltered slightly as he followed the captain to a corner of the room. The young woman couldn't hear their entire conversation, but fragments drifted across the space. "Do you have any idea who she is?" "Her father is the head of—" "Coming here right now." The officer's face began to lose color as the captain continued speaking. His shoulders, previously squared with authority, slowly slumped as the reality of his situation became clear. Back at the booking desk, the sergeant was already removing the handcuffs from the young woman's wrists. "I apologize for the inconvenience," he said quietly, his experienced eyes showing understanding. "Would you like some water while we sort this out?" She nodded gratefully, rubbing her wrists more from habit than discomfort. The surgeon's kindness was a stark contrast to the treatment she'd received so far. The arresting officer returned to the desk, his earlier bravado completely evaporated. His face had taken on an ashen quality as he struggled to maintain his professional composure. "There seems to have been a misunderstanding," he managed to say, though the words seemed to stick in his throat. "A misunderstanding?" The young woman's voice was calm, but carried an edge of steel that hadn't been there before. "You mean when you refused to let me explain that I'm an intern at the FBI field office, or when you ignored me mentioning my father?" The front doors of the station swung open, and a commanding presence filled the room. The new arrival wore a perfectly pressed suit despite the late hour, and his FBI badge gleamed under the fluorescent lights. The arresting officer's face went from ashen to nearly white. The night was far from over, and as the FBI agent's footsteps echoed through the suddenly silent station, it was clear that this routine traffic stop was about to become anything but routine. Time seemed to stand still in the police station as the FBI agent's footsteps echoed across the floor. His presence commanded attention without a single word spoken. Years of experience and authority radiated from his calm but stern demeanor. The late hour hadn't affected his appearance. His suit was crisp, his tie perfectly straight, and his badge prominently displayed. The young woman's relief was visible as she saw her father, though she maintained her composure. The arresting officer, meanwhile, seemed to be trying to make himself as small as possible behind his captain. "Good evening." The FBI agent's voice was measured and professional, betraying no emotion. "I understand there's been a situation involving my daughter." The station captain stepped forward, his posture respectful but not submissive. "Special Agent, we're already working to rectify this unfortunate misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" The FBI agent raised an eyebrow, his gaze shifting between his daughter and the arresting officer. Perhaps someone could explain exactly what kind of misunderstanding leads to a law student with proper FBI credentials being handcuffed and brought to the station. The arresting officer cleared his throat nervously. "Sir, when I saw the FBI pass, I assumed." "You assumed," the agent interrupted, his voice remaining eerily calm, "that a young woman with a legitimate FBI visitor's pass was committing a federal offense. Rather than taking 30 seconds to verify her identity." The booking sergeant, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. "The young lady wasn't even given a chance to explain herself, from what I gathered." The FBI agent nodded slowly, pulling out his phone. "That's interesting, because when my daughter didn't answer my call, I checked her location. Imagine my surprise when I saw she was here instead of at the library or home." He turned to his daughter. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Dad," she assured him, though exhaustion was evident in her voice. "It was just a broken taillight. I was trying to tell the officer about my internship and who you were, but—" she gestured helplessly at the situation around them. The arresting officer's face had gone from pale to almost green. His previous encounters with federal agents had left him with a chip on his shoulder, but this situation was rapidly spinning beyond his control. The captain stepped in again, trying to maintain some semblance of order. "Special Agent, I assure you this isn't how we typically conduct our traffic stops." "Officer, this isn't about a traffic stop anymore," the FBI agent cut in smoothly. "This is about abuse of power and a pattern of behavior that needs to be addressed." He turned to face the arresting officer directly. "Your captain tells me this isn't the first time you've had issues with federal employees." The officer shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, I was just trying to maintain law and order." By intimidating a young woman at midnight? By refusing to listen to her explanation? By jumping to conclusions that could have seriously impacted someone's life? Each question was delivered with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. The booking surgeon had begun pulling up records on his computer. "Sir," he addressed the FBI agent, "I'm seeing several incident reports involving this officer and federal personnel over the past year." The young woman watched as her father absorbed this information, recognizing the subtle signs of his growing concern. She'd seen that look before. It was the same expression he wore when discovering a pattern in a case. "Captain," the FBI agent said finally, "I believe we need to have a longer discussion about departmental procedures and interagency cooperation." He paused, looking at his daughter. "But first, I'm taking my daughter home. She has finals to prepare for." The captain nodded quickly. "Of course, sir. We'll have her car brought to your house first thing in the morning." As father and daughter prepared to leave, the FBI agent turned back one last time. "Officer," he addressed the man who'd arrested his daughter, "I suggest you take some time to think about why you wear that badge. It's not about power, it's about responsibility and service." The automatic doors swooshed open and the cool night air rushed in. As they walked to her father's car, the young woman finally let out a long breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Dad?" she said quietly as they reached the car. "I know you're angry, but..." He turned to look at her, his stern expression softening slightly. "Don't worry, this isn't about revenge. But sometimes people need a wake-up call to remember why they chose this line of work." As they drove away from the station, the young woman couldn't help but think about how this night would change things, not just for the officer who'd arrested her, but for everyone involved. Sometimes the biggest lessons come from the smallest mistakes, and a broken taillight had just sparked what promised to be a significant change in local law enforcement. As the morning wore on, more files were brought in, more patterns emerged, and the scope of their task grew clearer. This wasn't going to be a quick fix, but sometimes the most important changes start with a single incident, even one as seemingly simple as a broken taillight on a quiet night. The truth began unfolding like a complex puzzle as more evidence came to light. The police station's conference room had become command central, its walls now covered with timeline charts and incident reports. The FBI agent sat with the internal affairs team, reviewing hours of dashboard camera footage that painted an increasingly clear picture. "Watch this part again," the lead investigator said, rewinding the video from the night of the arrest. The footage showed the officer's approach to the car, his immediate aggressive stance, and most tellingly, his muttered comments before even reaching the window. "These feds think they own the streets," his voice could be clearly heard on the recording. Time someone showed them they're not above the law. The FBI agent leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. He'd already decided how this was going to go before he even saw the FBI pass. A young tech analyst paused the video, highlighting something on his laptop. "Sir, we've analyzed his patrol patterns over the last year. There's a clear trend of him specifically patrolling areas near federal buildings during night shifts." The police captain, who'd been quietly observing, shook his head. "He was hunting for confrontations," he said, his voice heavy with disappointment, "deliberately looking for opportunities to assert his authority over federal employees." More evidence appeared as they dug deeper. Complaints that had previously been dismissed as minor incidents now formed a pattern. The officer had developed a reputation among federal employees for being unnecessarily aggressive during routine stops. "Look at this," the internal affairs investigator pointed to another file. 3 months ago, he pulled over an FBI analyst for a broken headlight. The interaction started almost exactly the same way. The FBI agent's daughter had stopped by during a break between her exams, bringing fresh coffee for everyone. As she looked at the evidence wall, she noticed something. "Dad, look at the timestamps on these incidents. They all happened after dark, usually when people were leaving work late." Her observation sparked something in the captain's memory. "That matches his original incident," he said, pulling out an old case file. "The one that started all this. It was a late-night operation where federal agents took lead on his case. He felt sidelined, undermined." The tech analyst pulled up more dashboard footage, this time showing the officer's interactions with other drivers during daylight hours. The difference was striking. During the day, he was professional, even friendly. But at night, especially around federal buildings, his demeanor changed completely. "It's like he became a different person," the internal affairs investigator noted. The darkness gave him cover to act on his resentment. The FBI agent watched his daughter studying the evidence wall, her law school training evident in her analytical approach. "What do you see?" he asked her. She pointed to several reports. "These aren't just random incidents." Each time, he escalated the situation unnecessarily. But look at his language. He always tried to frame it as the federal employee being uncooperative, even when the dashboard footage shows otherwise. The captain nodded grimly. He was building a narrative to justify his actions, making it look like he was just doing his job, dealing with difficult people. As they continued reviewing evidence, a junior officer rushed in with new information. "Sir, we found something in his personal locker." A journal. The journal revealed pages of bitter entries about federal authorities, each one showing how deep his resentment ran. But it also showed something else. Moments of doubt, questions about his own actions, signs that part of him knew he was going too far. "This isn't just about power anymore," the FBI agent said, reading through the entries. "This is about a wound that never healed, festering into something toxic." His daughter, who had been quiet for a while, spoke up. "You know, in my criminal psychology class, we learned about how unresolved trauma can shape behavior. He's not just angry at federal authorities, he's trying to reclaim something he feels he lost that night." The room fell silent as her words sank in. The evidence before them told a story not just of abuse of power, but of a deeper human struggle, an officer who had let one bad experience twist his view of authority and justice. The captain looked at his watch and sighed. "The disciplinary board meets tomorrow. They need to see all of this, not just the evidence of misconduct, but the whole picture." Because this isn't just about punishment, the FBI agent agreed. It's about understanding how we got here and making sure it doesn't happen again. As the day drew to a close, the evidence painted a clear but complex picture. What had started as a simple traffic stop had revealed a years-long pattern of behavior rooted in a single traumatic experience. The question now wasn't just what to do about one officer, but how to prevent the system from creating more like him. The morning of the disciplinary board hearing arrived with an unusual tension in the air. The police station's largest conference room had been converted into a makeshift hearing room, with chairs arranged in neat rows facing a long table where the board members would sit. The officer sat alone at a small table, his uniform pressed, but his shoulders carrying the weight of everything that had been uncovered. He looked different now, not the aggressive figure from the dashboard cameras, but a man facing the consequences of years of unchecked behavior. "All rise," announced the department secretary as the board members filed in. 5 senior officers, 2 civilian oversight committee members, and a representative from the police union took their seats. The FBI agent and his daughter sat in the back row, they're not as participants but as observers to ensure transparency. The police captain started by presenting the evidence they'd gathered. Dashboard camera footage played on the wall screen, showing incident after incident. The officer's face grew more drawn with each video, especially when his own voice echoed through the room, full of anger and prejudice he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying. "What we've uncovered," the captain explained, "is not just a series of isolated incidents, but a pattern of behavior that stems from an unresolved trauma in Officer Wilson's early career." The internal affairs investigator stepped forward next, laying out the timeline of incidents. "Over the past 18 months, we've documented 27 traffic stops involving federal employees or their families. In 23 of these cases, the officer escalated the situation unnecessarily. Then came something unexpected. The officer himself asked to speak. His voice, usually so confident and assertive, was quiet but clear. "I've spent the last few days reading my own journal entries," he began, hands clasped tightly in front of him. "Watching those videos, listening to myself. I didn't recognize that person. But he was me. I let one bad night 7 years ago poison everything I'd worked for." The room was silent as he continued. "That night, when federal agents took over my case, I felt helpless, powerless. I'd worked so hard on that investigation, and in one moment, it felt like none of that mattered. I told myself I was protecting local authority, but the truth is, I was just trying to feel powerful again." The FBI agent's daughter shifted in her seat, watching the man who had arrested her just days ago. There was no satisfaction in seeing him like this, only a growing understanding of how easy it is for pain to twist into something destructive. One of the civilian board members spoke up. "Officer, what made you realize the extent of your actions?" He glanced back at the FBI agent and his daughter before answering. "When I saw my own behavior through their eyes. When I realized I'd become exactly what I thought I was fighting against, someone abusing their authority." The board took a brief recess to consider everything they'd heard. During the break, the police captain approached the FBI agent. "This could be an opportunity," the captain said quietly. "Not just for him, but for the whole department. We need better ways to handle trauma, better training for interagency cooperation." The agent nodded. "My daughter mentioned something similar. Sometimes it takes a crisis to show us where we need to improve." When the board reconvened, their decision reflected this understanding. The officer would be suspended, required to undergo extensive counseling, and would need to complete a new training program focused on interagency cooperation. But he wouldn't lose his badge, not yet. "This is a conditional second chance," the board chair explained. "We believe in rehabilitation, but we also believe in accountability. You'll need to prove that you can be the officer you were meant to be." As the hearing concluded, the officer approached the FBI agent and his daughter. His hands were shaking slightly, but his voice was steady. "I know sorry isn't enough," he said, "but I want you to know that I understand now. What I did wasn't just wrong, it was a betrayal of everything this badge is supposed to stand for." The FBI agent's daughter looked at him thoughtfully. "Sometimes understanding why we made a mistake is the first step to making sure we never repeat it." As they left the station, the captain was already on his phone, setting up meetings to discuss departmental reforms. The internal affairs investigator was reviewing plans for enhanced oversight procedures, and the officer sat alone in the conference room, holding his badge, finally ready to confront the pain he'd been carrying for so long. The sun was setting outside, casting long shadows through the windows. But unlike the darkness that had hidden so many of the officer's previous actions, this evening felt different. It felt like the beginning of something new, not just for one officer, but for an entire system that needed to change. 6 months had passed since that fateful night of the traffic stop. The police station's main training room was packed with officers from both local and federal agencies, all gathered for the graduation ceremony of the first Interagency Cooperation Training Program. At the podium stood the same officer who had once let his bitterness drive his actions, but he wasn't the same person anymore. His posture was different, more open, more at peace. He looked out at the crowd, taking a deep breath before beginning his speech. "When I started this journey 6 months ago, I wasn't in this room by choice," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the speakers. "I was here because I had forgotten what this badge really means. I had let one bad experience poison years of service." In the audience, the FBI agent sat with his daughter, who had just passed her law school finals with flying colors. They listened as the officer continued his story. "During my suspension, I spent a lot of time in counseling, confronting truths I'd been avoiding for years. I learned that strength isn't about power or control, it's about having the courage to admit when you're wrong and the wisdom to learn from it." The police captain nodded approvingly from his seat. The program had been his brainchild, developed in collaboration with the FBI and other federal agencies. It wasn't just about preventing conflicts, it was about building bridges between different law enforcement branches. "This program taught me something incredible," the officer continued, gesturing to his fellow graduates. "Every person in this room, whether they wear a local police badge or carry federal credentials, shares the same basic goal: to protect and serve our community. We're not competitors, we're teammates." The FBI agent's daughter smiled, remembering how her own experience had helped shape the program's curriculum. They had included real-world examples of both good and bad interagency interactions, using body camera footage to show how simple misunderstandings could escalate into serious problems. But the most important lesson, the officer said, his voice growing more passionate, came from someone I wronged. "The young woman I arrested that night didn't respond with anger or revenge. Instead, she helped design this program's legal ethics component. She showed me that real change comes from understanding, not punishment." In the months since the incident, the department had made significant changes. They'd implemented new oversight procedures, regular psychological evaluations, and mandatory cooperation training for all officers. The results were already showing. Complaints were down, and joint operations with federal agencies were running more smoothly than ever. The officer gestured to a wall where photographs showed various joint training exercises. "Look at these pictures. 6 months ago, you would have seen clear divisions, local officers on one side, federal agents on the other. Now, we train together, learn from each other, and grow stronger as a unified force." He pulled out his badge, holding it up to the light. "This badge isn't just about authority, it's about responsibility, to our community, to each other, and to ourselves. Every day, we have the choice to let our past experiences make us bitter or make us better." The FBI agent's daughter had also been busy beyond her studies. She'd started a student organization at her law school, bringing in speakers from various law enforcement agencies to help future lawyers understand the complexities of interagency cooperation. As the ceremony concluded, the officer stepped down from the podium to thunderous applause. The police captain approached him with a smile, holding out his hand. "Ready to get back on patrol?" "Yes, sir," the officer replied, then glanced at his new patrol assignment. His route would take him past several federal buildings, the same areas where he had once hunted for confrontations. But this time, he felt only a sense of purpose. The FBI agent and his daughter approached the officer after the ceremony. "Congratulations," the daughter said warmly. "Your speech was inspiring." "Thank you," he replied, then added with a slight smile, "though I hope you've had that taillight fixed by now." They all laughed, the tension of their first meeting now transformed into a shared understanding of how far they'd all come. As people began filing out of the room, the officer took one last look at the graduation class, local police officers and federal agents, talking, laughing, and working together. What had started as a crisis had become an opportunity for real change. The sun was setting outside, but this time the darkness held no temptation for abuse of power. Instead, it was just another shift, another chance to serve the community the right way, with understanding, cooperation, and respect for all who wore a badge, regardless of which agency issued it. Early morning sunlight streamed through the windows of the FBI field office as the special agent sat at his desk, reviewing files spread across his surface. His daughter's incident from the previous night had opened a door to something much larger than a simple traffic stop gone wrong. "Sir," his assistant poked her head in, holding a thick folder. "I've pulled all the complaints filed against that officer over the last 3 years, as requested." The agent nodded, gesturing for her to bring them in. As he opened the folder, his suspicions were confirmed. The pattern was clear: multiple incidents involving federal employees, each following a similar pattern of aggressive behavior and overstepped authority. His phone buzzed with a message from the police captain. "Internal Affairs wants to meet. This goes deeper than we thought." The agent leaned back in his chair, thoughts turning to his daughter. She'd called earlier to say she'd made it to her morning class, determined not to let last night's events disrupt her exam preparation. Her resilience made him proud, but it didn't diminish his resolve to address the underlying issues this incident had revealed. A knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. The Internal Affairs investigator, a sharp-eyed woman with years of experience etched on her face, entered with her own stack of files. "I think you'll want to see this," she said, placing a USB drive on his desk. Dashboard camera footage from last night, plus several other incidents involving the same officer. They watched the footage together in silence. The video from the previous night was especially telling, showing the officer's aggressive approach from the start, his dismissive attitude, and the moment he spotted the FBI pass. But it was the other videos that painted a more disturbing picture. Look at the pattern, the investigator pointed out. He specifically targets anyone he thinks has connections to federal agencies. There's a clear bias here. The agent nodded slowly. How long has this been going on? We've found similar incidents dating back 18 months, she replied, pulling up more files on her laptop. Most people didn't file formal complaints, but the dashboard cameras don't lie. Another knock at the door revealed the police captain, looking tired but determined. We've been doing our own digging, he said, joining them at the desk. Found some interesting connections to a case from his rookie years. Apparently, he had a run-in with federal agents during a joint operation. It didn't end well for him. The three of them spent the next few hours piecing together the puzzle. What emerged was a story of a young officer who'd had his authority challenged during a major case, leading to a growing resentment toward federal agencies. That resentment had slowly poisoned his interactions with anyone connected to federal law enforcement. The real concern, the internal affairs investigator noted, is how this slipped through the cracks for so long. We need better monitoring systems in place. The agent's phone buzzed again. A message from his daughter. She'd finished her morning exam and was heading to the courthouse to file her own statement about the incident. Even in the middle of finals, she was determined to do her part to address the larger issue. This isn't just about one officer anymore, the agent said, standing to look out his window at the city below. We need to look at the whole system. How many other departments might have similar issues we're not seeing? The captain nodded grimly. I've already started reviewing all our procedures for traffic stops and arrests. We need better training on inter-agency cooperation. The internal affairs investigator was already making notes. We should expand the investigation to include all similar complaints from the past 2 years. Look for any other officers showing similar patterns. As they discussed next steps, the agent's thoughts returned to the officer from last night. The man's face when he realized his mistake hadn't shown just fear, there had been shame there too. Maybe this could be more than just a disciplinary action. Maybe this could be an opportunity for real change. We need to approach this carefully, he said, turning back to his colleagues. This isn't about punishment, it's about fixing a broken system. We need better communication between agencies, better training for officers, and most importantly, we need to address the underlying attitudes that create these situations. The captain and investigator nodded in agreement. What had started as a simple traffic stop was evolving into something much more significant, a chance to bridge the gap between local and federal law enforcement, to address long-standing issues, and to create meaningful change in how agencies work together.